Okay, so continuing. So the point that I was making, and I'm going to try to phrase it a little bit more concisely, is that when you assign something meaning, you create a reference to the thing outside of itself, which cheapens it, it localizes it, and it's a problem. And by analogy, when you divide yourself into a counterculture, you're doing exactly the same thing. You're creating a reference outside of itself, which creates a schism, not just between the counterculture and the mainstream culture, but it slices and dices it all throughout the counterculture itself, with itself too. And with the psyches of the people in the group that are pointing at the mainstream and saying, I'm definitely not that. So, and that's problematic. Uh, things want to be things want to testify of the whole. This is what we naturally do. The blade of grass is, as Alan put it, empty, completely real, and in no need of a reference outside of itself, because it is part of the sacredness that encompasses everything. A little story from my own life. Several years ago, there was this little eco village in my neighborhood. It became a wonderful gathering place. A couple of guys, friends of mine, started putting on these movie nights, potlucks, where we would watch an incredible movie of environmental importance, political importance, and we would watch it, and then we'd have a potluck, and we'd divide into groups, and we'd discuss it. One of the people that hosted and put this on, I won't mention his name, but we, in our conversation, realized that he had lived on a piece of land a 3 to 4 hour drive away that I had spent 2 summers working on 30 years before. And it was so weird to come to this realization that not only that it was the same land, but he had heard rumors about the family that sold his friends that eventually bought the land. I don't even know when that would have happened, maybe 10, 15 years after I was there. But he'd heard rumors about it, and I was able to reach out to my friend's family and clarify those rumors. But what were the chances that we would make that connection? Of all things to even come up in conversation, let alone, you know, let alone just the reality of what happened, but then for us to somehow pull that out of our conversation and figure out that we had that commonality, it's so strange. A year or two later, I had reached out on Facebook, put an APB out for a room that I had for rent. This same friend saw my notice and that I was looking for a roommate, and had a friend and said, yeah, I have a friend that's looking for a place. And he named a couple of stipulations of things that she was looking for. And I said, yeah, that should fit us pretty well. And he said, great. I will give her your contact and she'll most likely be reaching out to you soon. Fast forward, a couple of months. And my son and I, who lived with me at the time, we're in our complex. We were coming back from the swimming pool to our apartment. He was several steps ahead of me, and he noticed that there was a woman outside her front door, which was downstairs from our apartment and one over, who was crying. And he said, what's up? What's going on? Are you okay? What's going on? And she said, I locked myself out, and my key's inside and I can't get in. So as I walked up, he explained the situation, and I was able to call the manager and have him come with a key and let her in. But this was the same woman that my friend said was probably going to be contacting me soon. We never got in touch at all, but somehow she moved in to the same complex, down one apartment downstairs and one over to the side. Like, what were the chances? I've had enough of these kinds of experiences that I've finally stopped thinking that it must have something to do with me and the other person. Me and the first person who spent time on the same piece of land, or me and the woman that moved in to my complex. But that's the thing. See, if I assigned meaning to that, I would be profaning the reality of why those things happen. Those things happen to call attention to the whole, that we're not just connected through a crisscross, like, those dream catchers with the crisscrossing strings. I used to think, hey, if the strings intersect, that's meaningful. We live in a soup. We live in a liquid of connection, of electric liquid connection. And it's enough to recognize that each of these experiences dignifies the whole. It's not trying to say, hey, you need to do something about this particular person. Like, you need to have a connection. This woman, we got to know each other lightly. And at a certain point, I was like, this is so weird. I want to try to figure out what this means. Do you want to go out and have a drink and just see what this all, if there's any meaning to this at all? And she's like, sure. Like, she was new in town. So I was like, well, I'll show you this cool place. And we did that. She was very gracious and it was fun, but it wasn't until a couple of months later I reached out to her and I was like, I think all this stuff is just a prompt to go within, and I would elaborate on it now, these couple of years later, and just say, these things dignify themselves by calling attention to the whole. In other words, it's perfectly meaningful to be meaningless. Everything is perfectly meaningful and meaningless at the same time. And that's okay. We don't need to ghettoize our psyches. We don't need to ghettoize our social groups into something that's trying to create a false sense of meaning that is separated from the whole. Because ultimately, like the empty blade of grass, we're all just manifestations of the divine. I call that God. Alan obviously didn't call it God, but he went as far as to say that it's all sacred. You don't have to hijack that reality by trying to point at something and say that's more important or more meaningful than something else, because it's all equally meaningful and it's all equally meaningless at the same time. And as we undifferentiate ourselves and as we learn to fearlessly manifest the reality of who we are, share that with the group, going back to the original threefold beat ethos of derangement of the senses. They're escaping me now. What are derangement of the senses, evading conventional morality, and naked expression? As we learn to express ourselves nakedly, recognizing that we're all one, we have no choice but to trust the whole. If we don't trust the whole with our truth and our expression, then we're just subdividing our own psyches, our own brains, our own hearts. Now we can, in that process, be skeptical of the mass consciousness, or as Lucian put it, the MBC, the modern bourgeois culture. We have to be realistic about the shortcomings of society and the mass consciousness. But at the end of the day, we still have to leave our gift. Taking into account all the realities that are there. But again, we find ourselves by trusting the whole and recognizing that we're part of it. We're on the big stage. We don't need to slice and dice ourselves. Everything is equally meaningful and meaningless all at the same time. So let's enjoy it. That's all I have to say tonight. Thanks for listening.